Etha sighed as she poured herself another drink. Her tavern was completely empty and the town wasn't much better, not since Thorger had claimed it as its hunting ground. Thorger, as the locals called it, was a particularly large wyvern and was infamous for having eaten and killed many of the town's residents. It was the beast's fault so few ever came to the town, and those that were here already rarely came out their homes or had left already. Just as she finished her ale, the chime on the door sounded and a tall figure entered. He was clad in fur and scaled leather with a sword at his hip. He appeared to resemble some sort of cross between a dwarf and an elf. The figure then approached the bar and sat upon a stool at the counter, muttering something about the rain. "Hello. Welcome to..." She tried to grate the customer, but he cut her off with a single word. "Ow!" He then slammed 3 coins onto the counter and waited, a scowl on his face as his eyes darted between each of the windows around the tavern. This was certainly no magical hybrid between the tavern keeper's people or the dwarves. This was a human, and once she had realized, the elf's expressions matched the man's. "Yes, sir," she grumbled as she began pouring the man a mug from one of the barrels behind her. As much as she despised them, a human customer was still a customer. "You're a coin short. It's 4 for a mug." This earned a glare from the man as he placed the extra coin on the bar, though he soon returned to watching the various entrances to the building after being handed his mug. Taking a long and uncomfortably slow sip, the man stood and approached one of the windows. "The wolf is here?" he asked. The fact he had spoken more than the initial interaction was more than the Etha expected, and as such had caught her by surprise. "The wolf? You mean Thorger?" she asked. A nod from the man was his only answer. "It stalks this town, yes." "You know this beast?" I know it. The same as I know many such beasts." He then moved to the door and began inspecting the wooden barrier to the elements. "The hinges are iron? What?" the barkeeper asked, confused, but quickly realized he was referring to the door hinges. "They are iron. Yes. What does it matter to you?" "Just checking." He then finished his ale in a second long and equally drawn-out swallow as before. Once finished, he returned to the bar to return the mug. "How often does he come out to hunt?" "Every night. If the sun has set, it is out there." "We don't offer board if that's what you're getting at, unless you plan on drinking the night through." Etha then returned to her own drink after having put the man's payment into a purse under the counter. Right as the man tried to speak, a loud roar could be heard from outside, one that Etha knew all too well. "It is not safe to travel the roads from now till dawn." "How long does it take him to catch a scent?" the human asked, though before she could answer, he made toward the door and flung it open. "Forget it. Just keep the door unlocked." And as quickly as he had arrived, the man was gone. "Good riddance. Thieves and murderers." Etha then finished her ale and continued grumbling to herself as she mulled over the events of Thorger's appearance. The beast had arrived 3 months ago. One night, a stable boy went missing, and the whole town had tried but failed to find him, yet that paled in comparison to what followed. The local farms had their entire livestock vanish, shortly followed by the farmers and their families. Houses were broken into and found empty by morning. That was when people stopped coming to town. All the shops ran out of stock, so they left. Next, people stopped going out entirely, and that had drained the tavern of its funds. It was then that the elf decided she would lock up for the night. The human wouldn't be returning, and so she saw no reason to follow his request. As she began locking the various openings around the tavern, a second roar startled her into hurrying her task, though as she reached the front door, she felt something was off. Right as she put her hand on the lock, the door burst open, the snarls that announced Thorger eliciting a scream from the woman. The beast's skin was covered in wounds, both old and new, as it towered over the terrified elf and began slowly approaching, savoring the meal to come. Etha began scrambling away from the wyvern, though a clawed hand grabbed hold of her throat and lifted her off the ground. As she was held aloft, the beast let out a triumphant roar, but as it opened its maw to feast, it froze. O-N-M, Y-L-I-F-E, Y-U-W, I-L-L-F-A-A-A-T, N-O-M-O-R-E. The human from before burst into the tavern, a maddened look in his eyes as he charged into the monster's side and caused it to drop Etha. Thorger quickly recovered and slashed at the man with one of its clawed hands, leaving a gash across the man's chest. Though as the beast tried to follow up with the other hand, the man had grabbed hold of it and began repeatedly slamming his elbow into the monster's jaw, followed up with several wide swings from the man's fists into its chest. The beast began snarling and biting at the human's face, only for him to catch the wyvern's maw and use the leverage to hurl the beast into the door. A great and terrible roar sounded, though this came not from Thorger as the man leaped at the beast, grabbing hold of both arms and planting his boot on its back. Yelps of pain came from the beast as its arms were twisted and pulled. The sight was making the elf sick to watch, but what followed shocked her even more. "You are like me," Thorger spoke. The monster's words were barely understandable as they were mixed with yelps and roars of pain. "I am no beast. I am Crusher, Smasher, and Breaker. I am might, fury, and power. I am strength and rage and death. I am man." There was a sickening crunch as bone was shattered and flesh was ripped and torn. The beast's arms were no longer a part of it. The man tossed the limbs to the side and grabbed hold of its head before hurling the screaming monster out into the pouring rain. "Go now. Die in the dirt like the dog you are." After his display over the monster, the man turned back to Etha and said but a single word, one that showed his power and might, one that marked his achievement.